The Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn. Book 4 Dragon and Herdsman. Chapter 24. They made it to evening, still without having seen, heard, or smelled any sign of Frost's mercenaries. Allison found them some partial shelter at the base of a steep hill, and within an hour they were fed and watered and settled in for the night. "Tomorrow's the day," she warned as she and Jack and the two Kadah sat together on top of the hill, finishing their ration bars. "I'm guessing we'll reach the river by mid-afternoon, at least." She eyed Jack. "At which point it's going to be up to you." Jack nodded. "My main comm clip's still wandering the forest attached to one of the hornheads, but I've got a spare in my shoe heel. Once we're close, I'll try giving Uncle Verge a call. With luck, we'll have a floater antenna up, and he'll have a floater antenna up, and we'll be able to hear us." "And if we're not that lucky?" Allison asked. "You have a plan B ready?"
"We have that covered,"
Dracos assured her before Jack could answer.
"But I do not intend to give up on Uncle Verge quite so quickly."
"I'm not giving up on him," Allison protested mildly. "I'll be the first to cheer if we hit the riverbank and find the SNA sitting there with its hatch open, ready to lift." She frowned. "SNA," she repeated thoughtfully. "What is it?" Jack asked. "I was just thinking," she said slowly. "SNA is a really odd name for a ship. Is that its christening name?" Jack shrugged. "It's the only name I've ever known it by. Why? Does it mean something?" "Not to me," Allison said. "Though now that I think about it, I suppose it could be initials. S and A. Did Virgil Morgan have two middle names?" "As far as I know, he didn't have any," Jack said.
"What is this christening name you speak of?"
Tanim asked. "That's a ship's official name, the one registered in the Orion Trade Association files," Allison explained. "A lot of people then give their ships what are called private or personal names." "Like a nickname," Jack added. "A ship might be listed as Rick's Cafe of Casablanca 3, but its owners just call it Ricky. There are an awful lot of ships flying around out there, and they all have to have unique christening names." "And again, SNA sounds like a private name," Allison said. "Have you ever looked it up in the official lists?" Jack snorted. "This may come as a shock, but I've spent most of my life avoiding everything official that the Orion Arm has to offer. This doesn't strike me as a good time to change that policy either." "I understand that," Allison said patiently. "I was just wondering." "Wondering is a wonderful exercise as long as you don't overdo it." Jack looked back at Dracos. "You think we should wonder about scouting ahead of ways and see what Frost might have cooking?"
"I don't think that will be necessary,"
Dracos said.
"I have not heard the floater or the capstan all today."
"But he could have sent some troops in along the river by boat," Allison pointed out.
"True,"
Dracos agreed.
"we shall have to be careful as we near the river itself."
"So we don't take a walk?" Jack asked.
"I take a walk,"
Draco said, standing up and stretching, cat style, with his forelegs thrust forward and his tail high in the air.
"There is no need for you to go with me, but I will require your comm clip."
"Be careful," Jack warned, digging the comm clip from its hiding place in the sole of his left shoe and handing it over. "Out here in the middle of nowhere, Frost wouldn't have much trouble locating it."
"I understand,"
Draco said, fastening the clip to his crest at the back of his neck.
"Allison, can you adjust your comm clip frequency to match Jack's? We may need to use them together at some point."
She nodded. "No problem."
"Good."
Dracos lifted his head and darted his tongue in and out a few times to taste the air.
"I will be back as soon as I can."
With a final look at Jack, he loped down the hill and disappeared into the forest.
"He should not go alone,"
Tinny murmured, her tail lashing restlessly as she gazed after him. "Dracos knows what he's doing," Jack assured her, trying to hide his own quiet misgivings. He can take care of himself. You mean up to now he's been lucky, Allison said bluntly. We all have been, mainly because Frost has been trying to take us alive. But sooner or later, even the best warrior's luck runs out. Not tonight, it doesn't, Jack said, glaring at her. And you're not going to talk that way again. Understand? For a moment, they locked gazes. Then Allison's eyes flicked to Tanim, and her lip twitched. You're right, she apologized. I'm sorry. Yeah, Jack growled. Give me the gun and go find someplace to lie down. I'll take the first watch. Sure. Allison handed over the machine gun. Tanim, you feel up to doing a little night patrolling?
Yes, of course.
Tanim stood up, her eyes still on the spot where Draco's had vanished.
What do you wish me to do?
Nothing fancy, Allison said. Just take a few circles around the camp, watching for predators and soldiers. If you smell or hear anything that seems threatening or even strange, you come and get either Jack or me. Understand? Tanim ducked her head.
Yes.
We just want to make sure nothing sneaks up on that Rasfas and your fellow Kada, Jack added.
Pukas,
Tanim corrected him, looking down at the group of dragons at the bottom of the hill.
They are not Kada.
She looked at Jack, an oddly intense look in her silver eyes.
Not yet.
The river turned out to be considerably closer than Allison had guessed. Barely 2 hours after leaving camp, Draco's caught his first scent of the water. He spent the next half hour moving cautiously toward it, his senses stretched to their limit, watching for the ambush that must surely be waiting. But there was nothing. No soldiers, no booby traps, no capstan, no floater, no boats, no hint of the enemy. It was as if the Malison ring had given up. He'd remembered from their earlier aerial view that the river was a wide one, but natural features always looked larger and more impressive at close range. For a minute, he stood at the edge of the river, gazing upward at the water flowing slowly past, its edge rippling quietly against the bank. Even at night, it was a majestic sight. But majestic or not, a river was a terrible barrier for a soldier to be trapped against. Perhaps that was why Frost's soldiers hadn't bothered to capture the riverfront. Perhaps their plan was to simply sweep in from the south behind the fugitives and pin them here with nowhere else to go. Allison had said that the Arasvas and Pukas spent their lives circling the edge of the forest as they foraged for food. That meant they had to cross the river twice per circuit, which implied they could either swim or else knew how to construct boats. But in this case, neither method would do them any good. As soon as they were on the water and out from under the protection of the forest canopy, they would be easy targets for airborne gunners. That was undoubtedly what Jack had been thinking about when he guessed that he and Draco slip away and try to draw Frost's attention. The problem with Jack's plan was that it wouldn't work. There was simply nowhere in the eastern grasslands where the two of them could hide from the mercenaries. Certainly not for the 10 or 11 days it might take for Allison's friends to arrive. If Jack was going to evade capture, he'd have to stay with Allison and the others in the forest. Which meant that if they were going to have any chance of drawing the Malison ring away, Dracos would have to do it alone. And, of course, without Jack along, he would die in the process. He gazed across the river, snatches of old epic poems and songs running through his mind. As a warrior of the Kada, he'd had to face the possibility of death many times, but it was somehow always different each time it happened, and it wasn't something he'd ever become accustomed to, especially when it would mean abandoning such a young and inexperienced host. Would Jack be able to manage alone? More important, would he be able to learn the location of the refugees' fleet rendezvous point alone and be able to save the rest of the Kada and Shantine? There was no way to know, but Dracos had no doubt that the boy would try his very best to do so. Jack had fully adopted the Kada warrior ethic of service to others. Even with Dracos gone, he would continue the mission as long as life remained in him. The Kada lashed his tail firmly. Yes, Jack would do his best, but Dracos had no intention of laying such a heavy burden on the boy's shoulders, not unless and until there was no other choice. Retrieving the comm clip from its place on his crest, Dracos gave the air one final sniff and clicked it on.
Uncle Verge!
He called softly. There was no answer.
Uncle Verge, this is Dracos,
he said again.
If you can hear, please respond.
Again, nothing. Dracos left the comm clip on another few heartbeats, then switched it off again. As Jack had pointed out, the device would stand out like a beacon in the wilderness, and there was no point in giving the Malison ring the exact location where he and the others would be coming out. Unless... Attaching the comm clip to his crest again, he leaned out over the water and looked in both directions. Downstream, he decided. Backing up into better cover, he headed east, looking for a good spot. He found it 100 yards away and a few yards in from the river. A stand of the by now familiar rubbery trees and their attached vine meshes. He hadn't brought any rope along, but the vines would be strong enough for what he had in mind. Quickly, he cut a group of them from their trees and tied them together. When he had about 60 feet, he tied one end to the base of one of the trees and began climbing the tree next to it, the other end of the vine rope in his mouth. He'd already done this once, back when he and Jack had taken out the Malison ring's double ambush line, and he had the technique down to a science. Within a few minutes, he had the tree bent over and tied in place. Cutting one final length of vine, he walked over to the treetop, which was now sticking out sideways a few feet above the ground. The other time he'd done this, he remembered, his approach had flushed a group of birds from those upper branches. Sure enough, another small flock erupted from the tree as he neared it, the branches swaying madly as the birds flapped away from the potential predator. Perfect. Tying his last piece of vine to the treetop, letting it hang loosely down, Dracos retraced his steps back to where he'd first emerged from the forest to the riverbank. There, he retrieved the comm clip retrieved the comm clip from his crest and switched it on.
Uncle Verge, this is Dracos,
he called again.
Please respond.
Again, there was no reply. Leaving the comm clip on, he backed away from the river into the concealment of the forest and silently counted out 30 seconds. Then, tucking the comm clip beneath his left foreleg, he broke abruptly into a loping run eastward toward his rigged tree. To anyone monitoring the comm clip's movements, and he had no doubt Frost's men were doing just that, it should look like he had just fastened the device to an animal and sent it scurrying away. He and Jack had already used this trick once, of course. Still, it was likely Frost would simply assume his opponents were running out of fresh ideas. Dracos came within sight of the bent tree and slowed to a trot. The birds had returned to their meal in the upper branches in his absence, again taking off as he approached. Fastening the comm clip to the piece of vine he'd left hanging, he backed away to watch. Sure enough, with the threat gone, the birds began to return to their meal. Each one that landed set the branches swaying, the movement translating down the vine to send the comm clip moving in small, unhurried circles. Draco smiled again. Frost might be suspicious, but he would have no choice but to conclude that the comm clip hadn't simply been dropped in the leaves in hopes of making him look in the wrong direction. Between the breeze and the birds, there should be enough movement to prove the comm clip was attached to something, and he would certainly conclude that that something wasn't Jack or Dracos. And he would also know the area where such a diversion had been arranged would be the last place the fugitives would actually head for in the morning. Which meant that when he set up his watchers above the riverfront in the morning, this would be the one spot on the entire river they would be most likely to ignore. It was late when Dracos got back to the camp, almost too late, and he could feel the uncomfortable tingling in his scales as he exchanged nods with Allison and slid onto Jack's arm. He had thought he'd been quiet enough not to disturb the boy's sleep, but even as he positioned himself on Jack's back, the other stirred. Dracos? He murmured.
Yes!
Dracos confirmed, feeling fresh strength flowing back into him.
All is well. Allison is on watch, and there are no enemies nearby. Go back to sleep.
Okay, Jack said, clearly sliding back toward unconsciousness again. You find Uncle Verge? Dracos grimaced.
We will find him in the morning,
he promised.
Sleep now, and I will do likewise.
Okay, Jack mumbled. Pleasant dreams. Under the circumstance, Dracos doubted that any of his dreams would be pleasant, but he would nevertheless make sure to get as much sleep as he could. One way or another, this would end tomorrow.